Hello, everybody. My name is Pablo Boczkowski, and I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University and the director of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Thank you so much for joining us for today's weekly virtual seminar of the Center. It is really a pleasure to have you with us. The mission of the Center is to create knowledge about digital media in Latinx and Latin American communities across the Americas, and today's speaker is a leading scholar in this space. Judith Mariscal is Executive Director at Centro LATAM Digital, Research Professor at CIDE, and member at its highest level of the National System of Researchers in Mexico. Facundo Suenzo, a doctoral student at Northwestern University and coordinator of the Center for Latinx Digital Media, will introduce Judith in just a minute. I'm delighted to note that this quarter our series is co-sponsored by the Alice Kaplan Institute for the Humanities, the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, the Center for Global Culture and Communication, the Department of Communication Studies, the Department of Radio, Television, and Film, and the Program in Latin American and Caribbean Studies. But before we go to the seminar, I would like to start by acknowledging that Northwestern is a community of learners situated within a network of historical and contemporary relationships with Native American tribes, communities, parents, students, and alumni. It is also in close proximity to an urban Native American community in Chicago and near several tribes in the Midwest. The Northwestern campus sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. It was also a site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes, and is still home to over 100,000 tribal members in the state of Illinois. It is within Northwestern's responsibility as an academic institution to disseminate knowledge about Native peoples and the institution's history with them. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity and inclusion, Northwestern works towards building relationships with Native American communities through academic pursuits, partnerships, historical recognitions, community service, and enrollment efforts. Let me say briefly a little bit more about how the seminar will unfold. First, Facundo will introduce Judith's research and career in just a minute. Then Judith will present her work, and after that, we will open for questions. Please enter your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar at the bottom of the screen at any point in time during the talk. Facundo will moderate. At the end, we will deliver some closing remarks. Once again, many thanks for joining us, and without further ado, Facundo, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute honor to introduce today's speaker in this new edition of the virtual seminar series. Professor Judith Mariscal is the founder and executive director of the Center of Digital Policy for Latin America and a research professor at the Centro de Investigación y Docencias Económicas, CIDE, Mexico. Judith Mariscal obtained a bachelor in economics from the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de Mexico, ITAM, and a master's in international economics and politics from the CIDE. After that, Professor Mariscal received her Ph.D. in public policy from the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin in the United States. Dr. Mariscal has been appointed to many distinguished academic positions throughout her career. She received the O'Gorman Fellow at Columbia University and was invited as a fellow researcher in the MIT Media Lab, among other positions in Mexico and in the United States. Dr. Mariscal has published 6 books, co-authored more than 20 book chapters, and published more than 30 journal articles and public policy documents. Her latest manuscript, published in 2016, is Internet y Pobreza, Evidencia y Nuevas Líneas de Investigación para América Latina, written with Hernán Galperín and published by the CIDE Press. With extensive teaching and research experience, Judith Mariscal has also significantly contributed to the community of scholars in the region. She currently is an associate editor of the Journal of Law and Regulation at the University of Brasilia, the School of Law, and an associate editor of the Information Technologies and Information Development at the School for Communication and Development at the University of Southern California. In 2018, Professor Mariscal founded LATAM Digital, a research center that generates knowledge, strengthens technical capacities, and promotes dialogue on accessing and adopting information and communication technologies for Latin American economic, political, and social development. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Judith Mariscal.
Facundo, thank you very much. Pablo, thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor and seems a lot of fun to be working with young scholars and sharing knowledge. Just a little correction, maybe it was my mistake. I have published since 2016 other things, not a book though. Anyway, the objective in general of this presentation, it is that, what is the role of digital policy and digital technologies, but more than talking about precisely what they are, it's how come we're not in a better position in the global South and Latin America specifically, and offering some suggestions as to what the path towards a more equitable development through digital technologies would be. So, Facundo, if we could begin. I think that, I've been looking at some of your other seminars, and I see that Hernan Galperin, my colleague and co-author in many, many papers, was there. So maybe I will duplicate a lot of the things that we said. But we all know, it's a pervasive tool, ever more present in societies in every way, every sector of the economy, of society and politics, that they can be a powerful tool, a very powerful tool to enhance the participation, the individual participation, and the participation of communities, and specifically underrepresented communities, in this path towards a more inclusive, equitable development. Just to mention that, as we all know, the digital world, the online world, is a mirror of reality, of the offline world, where there are very strong structural inequalities. So the challenge is how to use digital technologies not to increase those structural inequalities, but on the contrary, to be able to go to this path using technologies as a tool for learning and sharing knowledge and participating in the markets and in general in the world. However, today we stand in a very particular moment in the world we all know, where the specific crisis caused by the pandemic, wars, authoritarian governments in Latin America and in other areas of the world is presenting new challenges. So it is important to know, and I think I'll be repeating this, that even though digital technologies, internet specifically, and new technologies such as artificial intelligence can be very useful to contribute to this development, they are also a double-edged sword today, because they can be used and are being used to infringe human rights, privacy. We see an increasing alarming level of online violence, and particularly gender-based violence. So we need to go forward in two different directions. One of them is, for particularly Latin America, is despite this great progress, it's been a virtuous cycle since the 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s, of increasing development of digital technologies. In general, people that were never connected, that were never able to communicate, now are, and now we will go that into in a minute. Despite this progress, we're still very far behind in a very basic problem, which is being connected. So if we could go to the next one, please, Facundo. And the question is how, no? Even though it's trivially true that what would happen if we did not have access to these technologies, we cannot imagine a world where, you know, there's in an office, there are no computers. What is it? What has been the specific mechanisms through which ICTs and internet specifically can help diminish poverty, diminish inequality, and reach a more equitable society? Taking Amartya Sen perspective, basically is how can these mechanisms go through empowering the traditional assets of people living under poverty, which may be human capital, land, animals, is empowering them that through the use of this portfolio of assets to be able to participate in a way they want to participate. And it is, and the different empirical studies have shown how it can actually be a mechanism to get out of this poverty trap. The next one, please, Facundo. This is just a little bit of what would be that mechanism in, again, taking Amartya Sen. And it's both these increases in human capabilities and also in social capabilities there. An important part of it, and something that governments around the world today are working through international organizations like the Summit of the Americas and others, the United Nations, is how to be able to improve, to increase political participation of those communities that currently do not only not participate, but oftentimes are invisible. So this is basically one way to look at why digital technologies matter. Can you see the next one? This is actually taken from a book that we co-authored, Hernan Galperin and myself. It's there's been, you know, for a long time, people talked of the importance of new technologies and information technologies in specific, but really there was not enough information, granular information, to be able to do a research to provide evidence in the specific ways in which broadband, the existence, the introduction of broadband into the world was a huge leap, because it allowed for ever, you know, increasing possibilities to share data, basically, and many of the promises that since the 1990s we talked about new technologies and how that would get us to a better world, to the society of information. We weren't really able, researchers weren't really able to not necessarily quantify, but really find the exact evidence. And with new indicators available that have a more granular level, there's been a lot more literature specifically offering evidence on how this works, how through broadband adoption we can gain growth, economic growth, employment, and social inclusion. So this is, again, actually a graph that was done by Hernan. Can we go to the next one, please? So I guess this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty. So we all know, we all want digital access, broadband specifically, not only any access, we need high quality access. And not only internet, now we have new important technologies, and the obvious one is artificial intelligence. So what can the government do? Looking at it from what we do at Centro LATAM Digital is from a policy perspective. What happens? How come we have this lack of connectivity? And this graph is very, very old. It was done, I don't have the name right now, but in the World Bank. And it's, I think, a very simple way of presenting the problem. And well, I don't know if you could, in the blue is the market adoption gap, that if we look at a world where the ICT market or telecommunications market would be totally efficient, that is, if regulators would really eliminate any barriers to entry into the sector, we would get to a point where a lot more people would be connected. Obviously, that is the ideal world and does not happen. For many reasons, in many ways, just regulation in itself follows technological innovation with a lag. And as we all know well, institutions have not been as efficient as they could be. So we have a gap there. One first way to address this is through regulation, through a more efficient regulation. If I don't want to get into the technicalities of regulation, but if I would just say one thing, which is in general the idea of eliminating or diminishing as much as possible any barriers to entry into the market, in a context where, especially Latin America, we have very high concentration in the market of specific companies. And it's interesting to see that these companies, these telecom operators, the telcos, are two in Latin America, which is Telefónica and América Móvil. The reason for that is interesting, but I could just refer you to how the history of these two companies was supported by their own government, by Spain and Mexico. And interesting to see that really in Latin America, we don't see, as was expected back then, American companies, US-based companies in Latin America. So we have that problem, and there's much to be done there. Diminishing the barriers, allocating spectrum is a big, big issue. However, even if we could think of a world where regulation was perfectly efficient, there was effective competition, there would still be a space where is it sort of purple square is where there would be still be a coverage gap. And that is because the reality is that there are populations or areas, geographical areas, where it is just not profitable for companies to provide services. So this is the place for not regulation, but access policy programs. And I'm afraid this is also a place that there are a lot of areas of opportunity in the region. There has been numerous social access programs, and none of them have really been sufficient to be able to decrease to an acceptable level this coverage gap that we find, which is, brecha digital, digital divide, as we all know it. Can we see the next one, please? So, the first thing that happened, I think, mobile services were introduced as a luxury service, and all of a sudden it became really the means by which people that had never been connected were able to do it. One was the why, one was the prepaid modality, and the other one was the calling party pays policy that it made it possible for people that have no credit or stable income to have a contract. They didn't have to get a contract to pay monthly to a telco, but they were able to acquire a device and receive calls. And there's been a lot of work on this. It's qualitative work, many stories around the world that show how important it is for people with very, very low incomes to have access to mobile telephony. Just to point out one of them, which I always thought it was fascinating, is that in Kenya, in small town in Kenya, and then it happened in other places, in towns that there was no electricity, it was impossible to be able to connect their telephone. So new services came around, and one of them was the bus that would go around the town. They would charge people to actually charge their telephone, and then they could go home with a charged telephone, even though there was no electricity. There's been also many studies showing how so important this connection is, that people at the lowest level of income can spend up to 12% of their income in having access to the services, to the even very, very primary devices. So the mobile phenomena really made it clear that we were in front of a very specific revolution, which was information and communication. Fernando, you can please tell me if I'm, and my time is going up, going down. There's a very important paper by Jensen about fishermen in India. And what they saw was how once they got access to the mobile telephony, the fishermen were able to contact people in the market, in land, and could know what the prices of the fishes they were getting were, which ones were needed, and they got rid of intermediaries. And this was an important way of increasing their income. Communication in cases of emergency, and when snake bites somebody is in the middle of the desert, they can call someone. So it became a really very useful tool to diminish the vulnerabilities that unfortunately are usually more present in low income communities. Can you go on to the next one, Facundo, please? We've done throughout the years different studies. These are more ethnographic studies, and at this point, I think it was 2013. It was actually hard to find a place where there was really zero connectivity, and one of them was in Las Margaritas, which I'm sorry is not in Guanajuato. It's actually in the northern part of Mexico. And what they had there, it's really a community of women, because most of the men have left, migrated to the US. But they did get people that went to their community, volunteers, to see what was happening and how they could help them. So they came up with a store with producing products made out of peyote, which is not unrelated to the fact that they got these different volunteers from all over the world. But they were able to have a product, but they were not able to have a website or to have any way to distribute their this is this woman, a picture of this woman, and how they're creating the soups and the creams, the soaps. I'm sorry. One of the very important limits is that they yes, I'm sorry, Facundo, you have a question?
The audience raised their hand, but yeah, if they just a comment, if they want to ask questions, please enter the Q&A. So thank you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Again, we're going to go faster on this. For example, if they want to catch a bus to go to Monterrey or go somewhere else, they just didn't know the different changes in schedules. So they would have to just be standing there in the highway waiting for the bus to come because they have no information. And an important, there was a gatekeeper, one man in the village that would get money from social programs from public funds from the federal government, and would bring them, he would do the transactions to get these resources, and he would come to the community and say, here, I'm giving you these resources. And obviously he had a saying in many of the things that were going on. Could we go to the next one? This was a comparative study we did with cases that small towns, the other one, this one is in Santiago, New York, where this was the communications ministry made a pilot program, created a pilot program in a place where there was no connectivity at all. And through satellite connection, they capacity building too. After a year of having access, we made interviews there, and it was very interesting because they not only got access communications, but to mobile banking. And mobile banking is an incredible tool. For mobile banking is just the use of cellulars to get into the financial system. It was like a no-brainer because in many countries of the world, well, today or even 10 years ago, there was the penetration rate of mobiles was like almost 100%, 90%, 85% in some countries. And yet the financial inclusion was as low as 30%. And through mobile banking, it was a very powerful tool to be able to access credit and specifically savings. There's a very well-known case in Peru of using the conditional cash transfer program, so the way to give the resources through mobile banking. In fact, in Mexico, there was also pilot programs with the now eliminated program of Prospera, which was another conditional cash transfer where women have to travel unsafely and with a lot of costs, not only to the recipients, to the women, to get their monthly money, but also to government, for government to be able to take the money. So they were given more, very, it's actually devices that can be very simple. And they were able to start using credit, but more importantly, savings. Savings really made the difference, even if the savings could be very small. It allowed them to be able to face things such as tuitions, health problems, in some ways, buying small animals that then they could grow and sell. So it's a very powerful way of trying to contributing to leaving this poverty trap that we have talked about. Can you see the next one, please? This is how it works. I'm not going to go into it, but it's just it's like cash in and cash out. It is a paper I wrote with a colleague, Ernesto Flores Roots, that it was called the enigma of mobile banking, which is the big, the paradigm was M-Pesa in Kenya that has, it started, and within 6 years, it had 7 million customers using it. And basically it was using it to send money back home from Europe, from the migrants, to send them home, because as we know, the traditional systems are very, very expensive. So it was very easy for their families to receive the money through their cellular, and then the time, the top up that you get would be the way to pay for things in stores. So, however, that has really not expanded to many countries. In Philippines, it was an important development. In some other countries, but it's not something that we see. Obviously, we see mobile banking at levels where there's middle and higher income levels in the population, but not really for lower income populations, where it's clearly a business model, not because of the amount, but just because of the volume of people that can connect. Can we see the next one, please? So, having said that, and having hopefully agreed on the importance of being connected, I think that we all know this, that something that was just like an afterthought in some ways of, yes, there's a need to be connected. We still have to, that pending regulatory and public policy issue is still there. It made it painfully clear that those that were not connected suffered a lag, very, very important lags in access to education, teachers, students, health services, labor. They were just not able to connect because, as in a different way as it was before, when we began talking about the mobile phenomena, all you needed was a very low quality connection. But when you need an interactive communication, you need high quality broadband. So now we not only have to, as in public policy, look at connection, at any kind of connection, we need very high quality connection. And I think we all know all this, all the lags that were found, and the way that these structural inequalities have increased, because it's not only now having access to communication and information, but to participation in society. So those inequalities with the pandemic and with the lack of high quality connection made it increasingly, these structural inequalities increasingly more severe. And the possibility of diminishing this lag is even harder today. Can we see the next one? So where are we? I'm afraid I don't have the latest, but this is a tendency that in Latin America, well, internet growth obviously increased in different ways. We see there's, like, after 2010, it begins to be more stable. And well, Chile always seems to be a special case. There seems to, not always, but always be better off than the rest of the countries in Latin America. I think in some cases, just because of having a certain rule of law, but that's another issue. The point is that there was an important growth in general. Can we see the next one, please? And we looked at the difference between broadband in terms of fixed broadband and mobile broadband. The same way that mobile telephony was the one that increased dramatically, mobile broadband was the easiest also to be increased. Mexico is way down there, but and you see that this increase is continuing. And Facundo, Pablo, I'll send you a new version of this to see how we are since 2017. Can we see the next one, please? And this is where the problem comes. It's like this virtuous cycle where it's profitable for companies to invest. However, going back to our graph in the purple, part of the graph, the square, the way it's been adopted is very, very unique. Again, it follows the reality of structural inequalities in different countries. And you can see, of course, Chile being in a better position in terms of household access, and Peru, for one, when we could look at others, it was just some selected countries. But in general, there's an important inequality, not only in internet access in general, broadband access, but more specifically in the quality, and thus the possibility of participating meaningfully in society. And why? One of them is affordability. It's always been very hard to look at different tariffs and rates because it depends what kind of service you have. But one of the really important sources of this inequality is the lack of affordability. This is a study done by Facundo Suenzo and Matias Nigo, and they've been keeping up somehow with this and looking at how even the cheapest broadband plan is really not affordable to an important segment of the population in the region. Now, Facundo, can we go to the next one, please? So, okay, here's why. Throughout the 1990s, with the first generation of reforms, telecommunications reform, the first response to this is give the incumbents, the previously state-owned telcos, obligations to go to provide services to small towns. It was not a very difficult thing to achieve because really the obligations were not very severe. So that was something that they did do when this was a privatization, but of course was very, very limited. And then there's been other micro telcos. Telecenters is more business, and telecenters is one way of shared access that was very, very popular, I think, at the beginning of 2000. So I'll talk a little bit specifically about the latest ones that are, well, micros right now are being popular in different parts of the world, certainly in Mexico. So can we go to the next one? well, I think I've already mentioned this one, so we can go to the the universal service or access of this concept comes from back in last century with Veal and ATT. Universal service funds are a way of, it's like a basket. What happened is that the government would tax the telcos 1% of their annual rents and put them sort of in this basket. And what they did with that, what they were supposed to do, is have an auction, sort of a reverse auction, put it out and ask the companies to say, we're going to subsidize your deployment to unserved areas. Who needs less money? And I believe it was actually something that could have worked. It worked. This was all over the world. The universal access funds, India, Ireland. There are several countries that it actually worked. It worked to cover areas that were not covered. In Latin America, however, we can't even say, because they were not used, basically. I don't have the number right now, but it was like governments just sat on these funds and were not used for 10 years. And it was like $500,000 million in Brazil, for example, and they were simply not used. Can we go to the next one? The shared access and telecenters were a way that many people got connected. And however, as we know, as we can imagine, it also has limits. Many of these physical spaces in many towns were schools. So at a certain hour of the day, they were closed, so people could not go in. There were few shared access that had a capacity building program, so they were just there, and people would walk in and pay, or some of them were publicly funded. So it was a good thing to have. It was certainly not a way to address the larger problem of the population. Can we see the next one, please? And Facundo, please, if I'm going, tell me when I have 2 minutes. Yeah, so these are some of the problems that they found. Microtelcos. Microtelcos is it's actually a very interesting case that has not been done by governments. It has been done by micro enterprises. Again, my friend Edman wrote about it many years ago, but today they're coming back with a lot of force, saying this is the answer to towns, areas that are not connected, that this is one in Talia de Castro, Oaxaca. The problem with this, well, first of all, what it is that they connect to the backbone. They receive a connection to the town, sort of the last mile. And so it's not so expensive to get connected. In many countries, they also have spectrum that is cheaper for these kind of connections. However, what we see is that these cells are not going to go through the whole transaction of getting that connection, getting the technicians, getting the negotiations with the government. They really need a leader, and these leaders come from outside of the town. The case of Rizomatica is very interesting. You can look and see what they're doing now. But Peter Bloom specifically had a very important role in being the coordinator and leader of this. Now Eric Huerta is one behind Rizomatica that is lobbying for this kind of program, which again can be good, but usually because it's a connection to the backbone and it's not a direct broadband access, the quality is very, very low, and it needs people, volunteers, to do this. Can we see the next one? So the next,
Maybe
excuse me?
have 5 more minutes, so we have 5 more
Thank
to
you.
the audience to ask some questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let me put it here because national broadband plans, everybody had one. There's been a lot of studies about this. What happened? What happened, a good thing was, remember we're talking about the universal access programs, and those baskets that were full of money were used to build these basically big networks. There's a big deficit of infrastructure in all of these countries. And you can not only now do it through mobiles, you really need some broadband that is much more expensive and has a lot of sunk costs. So what they did is created this big countrywide networks. Usually they were wholesale networks. And can you see the next one? Well, yeah, this is some in Latin America, mostly everybody did it. It was also interesting that I'm not really going to go much into it, but the relationship between who was building these networks, whether the private sector or the government, depended a lot on the ideology of the administration that was in charge at this point. Mexico is a very, very sad story where it didn't work, but we could, or I could provide you with more information about that. So again, most of these networks are not really working. They're not in function. They're oftentimes being duplicating. They're in places, they've been built in places where there already is a network. Can I see the next one? These are some of the cases of different national broadband plans, which means different wholesale networks. So yes, getting there. We're far from where we should and need to be. And we do know that every reform since the 1990s has had as objectives to increase investment, to increase the level of technology, using state-of-the-art technology. Even the last set, or second, third generation of reforms in several countries, in Mexico specifically, what happened, the really big objective was to diminish concentration and to create this big wholesale market, wholesale network, I'm sorry. But it has never been, in the social coverage programs have always been something that comes along with other objectives. It has never, up to now, been one clear top objective in digital agendas or development agendas. There's a lot of lip service, but not really resources assigned here. Can we see the next one? This is just looking at, now it's not only connectivity, it's not only broadband, it's artificial intelligence too. This is one way where through artificial intelligence, we can see islands of poverty in cities that are right next to very affluent houses, and today are not registered under the Coneval, the evaluating poverty agencies, and therefore are not really getting any possibility of public services. So the takeaway here is artificial intelligence is a very powerful tool, again, that can lead towards development. The next one. And however, there again, as I was mentioning, it is a double-edged sword, and I think we all know this. We all know that algorithms are not neutral. We know that that the design of internet is designed, and the content and the language and the knowledge is about the global north. So how this is a big challenge. Yes, we look at high quality connectivity, but also we need to start using these new technologies, and these new technologies come with great opportunities, but also with very, very high risks. With, as we talked about, online violence, surveillance from government, especially for migrants, for example. There's a big tension between, we all know, and I'm sure you've talked about this. Oops, that means I'm going to be done. Can we go to the next one? And my proposal here is one way to, I think, that has never been done, and is really to have a coordinated meaning coordinated between intergovernment organizations, agencies, and ministries. Is the digital technologies are pervasive. I mean, it are necessary in every sector, but a good benchmark or a good example is one in the United Kingdom, and one that began in the US with the Obama administration and began in Mexico during the Peña Nieto administration, but really never went through. But it's a small group of people that can have very high level political support to be able to coordinate a set of objectives and go towards what we all want, which is an equitable, inclusive digital agenda towards democracy. So thank you. I think that was it. Yes.
Much for this very timely presentation and for in this conversation. To remind the audience, if they have any question, they can enter them in the Q&A section of the Zoom function. We have still some minutes to interact with questions, but I would like to start with one. You mentioned through several cases in your presentation the importance of having access, and also the centrality of devices, especially of the mobile phones. If in the projects that you mentioned, if you found any evidence of the importance of people having skills to maintain and to take care of the devices they have, and how they incorporated those skills to being able to repair the devices that sometimes might be broken, and they don't have like a network for to keep those devices alive in some way. Particularly because you mentioned the shared access point and the telecenters, and this remind me of David Nemer presentation also in the seminar about those centers in the favelas in Brazil, and how those people have to take care of these like computers, screens, like because no one will probably the program just put them in those spaces, but then they sometimes forget that they have those devices there. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that issue too. Thank you.
Okay, my first thought is the importance of the problems with shared access is that they really did not include the importance of mobility, of mobile access, of mobile devices. So, you could just go there and work, but today the world is mobile, and so there's mobile tablets, and iPhones, and I think that's where we need to go, not have shared access in computers. So that is really the biggest problem in terms of keeping up with them. Not only have they not kept up with the maintenance of computers, but they have just died, basically. I mean, they don't work anymore, they're closed. In Mexico, we have, during the last administration, it's Mexico Conecta or something like that. And you would see in the school or in one place, like different agencies would come and put on the satellite or put on, whatever connectivity device they have. So yes, the question is, they are not, the maintenance is very important, but the way to go is mobile. And then, and the second thing is that it's not, the skills needed are more in terms of just using, of learning what is the needs they have, which oftentimes, they're mostly in English, and there's a big movement towards incorporating different languages, and not only languages, but different cultures, the participation of underrepresented communities. Again, this movement or this concept of decolonizing the internet is very important. So, when you talk about shared access, I believe we just forget about that one, let it go. It's money, public money that should be used somewhere else, and really try to get the infrastructure and the capacity and the design in terms of being inclusive to people in populations that today are pretty much invisible. Sorry, Pablo, I can't. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Judith, for a great presentation. We are right on time, so thank you also, Facundo, for great moderation. Thank you in the audience for staying with us through the end. Hope you have a great rest of your days, and I invite you to join us again next Thursday at the next iteration of the virtual seminar series of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Thank you very much, Judith. This was a very important presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope we can keep on doing this.
Absolutely. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.